It's such a pleasure to be joining you right here on ET Now, India's #1 business channel, with perhaps one of the biggest corporate stories of all time, the mega merger, because Vodafone and ID are indeed in talks. I'm Supriya, Shrinate in New Delhi, and joining me all the way in Mumbai is my colleague Sandeep Gurumurthi.
That's right, the mother of all mergers is in the works. Vodafone has confirmed that it is in talks with Idea Cellular for a grand alliance. The combined will become India's largest telecom operator with 43% market share ahead of Bharti Airtel. The new telecom behemoth will also have enough and more ammunition to take on Mukesh Ambani's Relgio. But this proposed Big Bang merger won't be without its share of hurdles and roadblocks, with stringent M&A norms making the deal a tricky one to execute. Supriya?
Indeed, and so what could this big deal mean for Indian telecom landscape, and is consolidation the new normal for this troubled sector for a while? We're joined by a very special panel: Rajan, Mathews, Director General COAI. We've got Sanjay, Kapoor, former Chief Executive Bharti Airtel. We also have Rahul, Khullar, former Chairman TRAI. Chandrashekhar, former DOT Secretary, and of course President Nasscom now. Thanks very much, gentlemen, for being with us and joining us on what is really perhaps one of the biggest deals in Indian telecom in a very, very long time, one that has the potential to change the sector. Let's really begin with you, Dr. Khullar. Do you see this as a game-changing event as far as the Indian telecom space is concerned?
I think it is a very important move, because I think consolidation was long overdue, but I do not believe the proposition that it will reduce competitive intensity. I think if anything, competition will increase, and in terms of benefits for the industry, they will be huge, because once the two large players merge, it gives the incentives for all the others, including the small ones, to be gobbled up by the 4 or 5 who will be left standing.
It is a disruptive move indeed. Rajan, Mathews, let me put you in a bit of a spot here. Would you admit that this deal has happened because of Reliance Jio? Is this a Reliance Jio impact? Surely this deal wouldn't have happened if a massive operator like Reliance Jio didn't come and disrupt this beautiful equilibrium that existed between the 3 GSM operators. Is this a Relgio impact? Let's hear it from the COAI.
I am not sure that it is. My understanding is that these discussions started several months ago. I'm sure that it must have been given some impetus by the entrance of Jio into the marketplace. But I think the fundamental push towards consolidation was really as a result of 2 things. One, initially as a result of spectrum scarcity, and then the price of spectrum that was foisted on the industry. So I think that was clearly one of the critical drivers towards this consolidation move. Secondly was, of course, the financial situation of the industry, the increasing levels of debt and debt servicing costs vis-a-vis interest expenses, which make the profitability of companies extremely suspect. So that was another reason to show that really you had no place for more than perhaps 2 or 3 really well capitalized competitors and operators. So I think those would be the 2 big drivers. Clearly Jio did have a role to play vis-a-vis in intensifying and perhaps accelerating that drive, but principally the cost driven by spectrum pricing, and 2, the financial health of the industry and what was in store going forward, which was exacerbating these drivers.
Sanjay, I don't expect Rajan to sort of explicitly agree that it's the Jio effect, given his position, but let's look at it in perspective. Do you think that these 2 operators were left with no choice? On the one hand, you had an operator like Reliance Jio with significant cash. You had Bharti Airtel, which was perched in its leadership position, which is of course now being taken away, but again it had the sort of spectrum and the footprint to stay there. So were they left with no choice?
So look, you got to put it in the right perspective. I think it was inevitable that consolidation is going to be the order of the day in the Indian telecom market to make it profitable and sustainable. And therefore the consolidation began with marginal players. But first time 2 serious players trying to merge together which actually changes the rules of the game going forward. And I think it is good for the industry, and I agree with Dr. Khullar, for its sustainability and profitability, and it's also good for the consumers who need to be given an experience which is world-class, which cannot happen till the operators are adequately funded and capitalized, and this is what this move really makes possible. Now coming to the Jio part of your question, of course, I think we need to give some credit to the challenger in the market who has actually, being a challenger, set some new norms in the industry. You know, first and foremost, I think 4G came in vogue only because of him. Till the time Jio entered the market, everybody was still on 2G, 3G and really flirting with 4G at best. I think he's the guy who's moved the entire telecom space from 2G to 4G, and 3G is passé, as per me. Second, very clearly a market that was all about rate per minute or rate per MB or GB has catapulted to now considering bucketized plans, which is nothing but ARPU enhancement, and that's a change that has happened. And finally, the bucks required to compete in this industry have really shot through the roof given the spectrum and the investment required, and consolidation, I think, gets pushed because of that new normal. And I think that new normal has been pushed because of Reliance's entry in the market. Because if this is what the customer is going to be consuming in terms of data, voice is going to be free, and the data is going to be as affordable as everybody claims it will be, then I think unless and until you consolidate and the competition is really between 2 or 3, this game is not playable. It is not a game for the weak-hearted, and it is not a game for balance sheets that are either light or medium.
All right, so a game not for the weak-hearted, a game not for weak or light balance sheets as well, and which is why, Mr. Chandrashekhar, would you agree with the first question that Sandeep actually asked, that is this merger a forced one because Jio happens to the telecom world? Is this the big Jio impact in that sense?
I think that probably was a significant factor influencing the decision, but one can't speculate about that. But clearly the need for merger, the need for consolidation, the need to be able to prepare for the long haul and to dig one's heels in and ensure that you have the necessary financial muscle for the long haul would have been important factors weighing with the two companies.
So Rajan, Mathews, if I may come to you and really talk to you the implications of this move. You know, the senseless telecom market that had some 8, 12 operators came down to about 6, then 4, and now perhaps the big 3 in that sense, including RelJio, of course, and this merger does go through. Will pricing power finally return to the Indian telecom operator, something that has evaded the telecom space for a while now? Rajan, Mathews? Okay.
Thank you.
Sanjay Kapoor, if I may throw that same question to you, and
that there is increasing consolidation.
Carry on, Rajan, we can hear you.
Yeah, I think there is a sense of discipline. Okay, all right, okay.
Mr. Mathews, we can hear you. Go ahead, sir.
All right, thank you. So I think, yes, as a result of the consolidation, I think we will begin to start seeing a little more consolidation in terms of pricing and options available to the consumer. But I think going forward, all of the operators are going to look to see what is this emerging play all about. I think none of us have really cracked the paradigm of what it means to sell, especially in a market dominated by a 95% prepaid overhang. It's very difficult for consumers to be able to meter this type of thing in an experience. So the whole notion of bucketized plans, the whole notion of fair usage, quote-unquote unlimited consumption, is going to be part and parcel of what it means for the pricing to emerge in terms of what it means in the marketplace. I think the other significant issue that is going to crop up is how we educate the consumer. The consumer is not intuitively tuned in, although they will catch on, but I think there's a fair degree of education that has to go on in terms of getting them used to what they should begin to expect vis-a-vis both affordability, the use of prepaid, the use of bits and bytes, and all of these emerging applications that are going to be provided on a data network. This is going to be the area of focus going forward.
Comment on that, Mr. Rahul Khullar. As a chairman of TRAI, you've had a sort of very close eye at pricing of telecom services. Do you believe that this deal will lead to consolidation of the industry with just 3 large operators, and in a sense, the pricing power will shift from the consumer to the operator? Do you see that happening?
No, I don't agree with that. I think that over 2017, because of Jio, there is not going to be pricing power returning to the old GSM operators just yet. 2017 is going to continue to see a price war of sorts, but on the downside. I don't think you're going to see sudden hikes in prices, whether of data or of voice. So that's my reading of what will happen through 2017. In 2018 and beyond, it will be a different story. It's too early to say what will happen. But judging from what's happened in the rest of the world or in other jurisdictions, there have been at most three large players. In fact, at most, sometimes 2 large players and one small player. And there's been huge competitive intensity. Now, in India, even after this merger, you still will have Jio, Airtel, Discombine, Reliance, BSNL, and a host of others. Now, even if the host of others gets gobbled up, you still have 5 players. So what are you worried about?
We'll not talk about the consumer impact right now, but Sanjay, what does it mean for operators? If you look at how telecom stocks reacted in trade today, incredible to see Bharti Airtel lose its position as the largest operator, and still the stock price went up some 9%, because many in the street believe that sanity will return, that pricing power will return to the market. Is that a very simplistic assumption here? Because like Mr. Khullar was pointing out, Jio is still going to be an aggressive player. We are unlikely to have this sort of comfortable interplay or a comfortable competition between Bharti, Idea, Vodafone and Jio like it existed before the entry of Jio. So is it too simplistic to assume that pricing power will return to the operator, at least in the near term?
So Sandeep, I do not understand what direction the stock markets move necessarily, and I don't want to comment on that, but I can comment on the fundamentals of what's going on. I'm a believer of the fact that the current price situation in the country, both on voice and on data, is not because of the marginal players as much as of the leading players. They fight fiercely amongst themselves to do it. And just by combining Idea and VODA, that intensity is not dying down. I think some orders have changed in this country for good. I think in consumers' mind, voice is going to be for free. And I don't think that perception is going to be dying down in a hurry. I don't think the challenger will allow that to die down, because it goes against the promise that he's made to the market. And I think everybody else will try very hard to be competitive as against that claim that is there in the market and that expectation that is there with the consumers. On the data side, I think the capacities that are being built up in this country and the propensity of data consumption that lies in the hands of consumers, and especially the younger generation, is immense. And there is no reason why, at least in the next 4 quarters, 6 quarters, you should see that euphoria dying down. So I think there'll be more data available to the consumer at more and more affordable and lesser prices. And the meaning of rate per MB, rate per GB is yesteryear's thought process. That's all going to get converted to a bucket which is going to contain a lot of data in it. And I think when you look at all these things, the answer is I do not see the intensity come down, at least in the next 4-6 quarters. But I also agree with Dr. Khullar that what will happen in 18, 19 is anybody's guess. My own take is that the real winners going forward on especially the data domain will actually get more and more clear over the next 6, 8, 10 quarters. You will see the winners emerge very clearly on customer experience. And I've always said it's the customer experience that will determine the winners and not price necessarily alone. So I guess that's where we are. It's good time for the consumers. Eventually, in the long run, it's good time for the industry. But in the short run, the intensity is going to be as hard as it was yesterday.
You know, you're actually triggering me to a question on the consumer space, but I'm going to resist the temptation and just stick around with players for a while. And Rajan, Mathews, if I may ask you this question, will this also trigger a consolidation wave in the sector? We've seen weak operators. There is already this buzz of Bharti Telenor deal happening. Will this particular merger talk trigger far more consolidation than Indian Telecom has seen? More M&A perhaps?
Yeah, I think there's still opportunity. We've already moved from a player field of 13 to effectively about 5. There's talk now about where the Airtel Arcom deal is, but that's definitely on the table. We know that there's talk of Telenor obviously being looked at by various operators. So I think going forward, we should see 3 major players stay. I think Airtel, clearly the one dominant present player, a combine between VODA and Idea, hoping that everything goes through as the second one. And of course, RIL has made it very clear that it doesn't attempt to disappear. So the question is, what happens with the Arcom Aircel merger, and then consequently after that, is there a further consolidation between Arcom, Aircel, that combine, and another existing entity? So I think at the end of the day, you probably will see 3 dominant players, and of course BSNL, MTNL again combining, as that is also on the card. So I think that's the landscape. Beyond that, it's very difficult to tell whether any more consolidation would take place beyond that.
Indeed. Just hold your thoughts there, because I do want to get in Mr. Chandrashekhar as well on this bit, and I'm tempted to ask him a question on regulation, which I will just next. But if I may ask you a question, this wave of consolidation that may be triggered, Rajan Mathews believes he's absolutely going to see something like this. Do you share that view as well?
It could be, because some of the operators, including some of the names that you mentioned, don't have a pan-India footprint. Some of them have an extremely localized footprint, and therefore in the current context, I think the feasibility or even the advisability of continuing with operations with such a limited footprint would be one question. And therefore some further consolidation cannot be ruled out. When the number of active providers, as long as it does not fall below 4, one perhaps need not worry too much, and between the regulators and the competition amongst the players, one could hope that the consumer would get a fair deal. But once if it falls below that, then I think there's plenty of reason to worry.
Okay, now let's talk about the contentious issue, the regulatory hurdles that this deal needs to cross. And I'm going to start with you, Mr. Rahul Khullar. This is going to be a tricky one. There is concern of market dominance. Obviously everyone's talked about the spectrum cap and the market share caps. Both of them are going to be violated in several circles if the merger happens in the way that we envisage. Obviously, I have to mention here that the 2 operators haven't divulged details of the merger, but as things stand, the deal will violate serious spectrum caps and subscriber thresholds across circles. It could also translate into significant, into the creation of a dominant player do you believe that could also translate into abuse of market power? Will the CCI look into it? What will be the TRAI and DOT stance as well? You're the expert.
Yes, CCI will look at the dominance issue, whether it is in terms of revenue share or spectrum. But ultimately, the decision on whether dominance translates into abuse of market power, now that's a very, very tricky issue. And if they just look at what has happened to tariffs, even with one less player, they will see that there is very little scope for abuse of market power. So I think that's not, that's an important issue, and it's for the Competition Commission to decide. I think the more important issue which the merger will throw up are questions surrounding what do you do with conditions pertaining to revenue share and spectrum. Let me give you an example and you'll understand. Supposing in any industry, forget telecom, somebody has 60% market share. And what are you supposed to do? Is he supposed to lose his customers? Or if he goes from 60% to 70% because he has a better product, as long as there is no abuse of the market power, you can't start clamping down on such industry leaders. So that's the first point. The second is that, purchase of spectrum in an ex-ante sense, yes, it can be subjected to rules. But in an ex-post sense, where I'm acquiring somebody else's spectrum during the currency or of the life of the use of that spectrum, how are you going to impose these conditions on me?
All right, so you're actually making a case for some of these norms to be revisited. Will that happen is an important point. But Mr. Chandrashekhar, there are serious issues from a regulatory point of view. You've been a telecom secretary yourself. This is a merger that's going to violate a lot of M&A norms that were put out by the government a few years back. Is there a way out? What is the way out? Is there a way out other than the operators sort of surrendering spectrum or surrendering subscribers? What's the way out?
Well, there are two different caps involved here. One is of the market share, where there are caps which are laid down, which would attract the attention of the regulator, that is TRAI, and possibly also of the Competition Commission. And the second is of caps on the spectrum holding. And these caps are, reckoned and enforced circle-wise. So in the circles where the cap is getting breached, there would certainly be challenges in terms of the merger of the licenses or of consolidation of the spectrum holding as well. I would imagine that these problems will need to be addressed circle-wise, and it's a fairly complex problem. It's not a simple problem, but at the end of the road, I think that is a problem which can be addressed.
I really want to go back to the marriage of the two players, and Vodafone and Idea are the two partners. And Sanjay Kapoor, if I may begin with you very quickly, Vodafone is a multinational company. It's got operations all across the world. Idea is a homegrown operator, and so far the big three, which is Airtel, Vodafone and Idea, have competitively collaborated and operated in the sector. But how significant will the cultural integration be between these two companies, between Idea on one hand, which is homegrown completely, and Vodafone on the other?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And, the two gentlemen who spoke before me are authorities on what regulatory hurdles are. But I tend to agree with Mr. Chandrashekhar that eventually the regulatory hurdles are easier to overcome because there are ways to do it. There are other parts of the world where any incumbent who had crossed those hurdles actually shed some customer numbers, etc., in favor of other operators. And I'm sure there'll be a innovative way to get across, and there'll be policies that will probably help these operators to justify to the government that they're compliant. I think the bigger challenge is exactly what you said. it's all around the implementation and integration. We must understand that India today is going through a big challenge from a new operator in the market. India is also going through a big transformation where the country and the operators in the country are trying to move from a very voice-centric business model to a data-centric business model. And now is the complication of a merger in the midst of all this. Can you imagine the energies that are required, the attention diversion that will happen because of this? And does the current management bandwidth, resources inside these two companies have the capability of dealing with all these three challenges simultaneously and are able to integrate the two companies culturally very well? Because you're right, one company is a global company, works like a multinational, the other one's a homegrown Indian company, which is international as well. It's an Indian MNC group, very successful. But can they merge all this in the midst of a hyper competition that's going on and the transformation that's going on? I think that's going to be the biggest challenge, because the ecosystems that are operative in these two telecom operators, other than the passive infrastructure, are all distinct. Circle by circle, they use different service providers, they use different billing systems, they use different CRMs, they have different caliber and training with people who work for them, different processes. How do you unite all this together? And again, there's a complexity around the brand. I mean, one brand is very urban centric, which is VODA, and the other brand is more rural centric, which is Idea. Same are their customer bases, split in almost a similar fashion. And now in the midst of all this, when you really go through the fine print, it says that the merger will take place through a process where fresh shares of Idea will be issued. You know, are we saying that the brand will be Idea? Will the company be controlled by Idea? Will the company be controlled by VODA? I think those are the nuances that are not known to any one of us. And also it talks about deconsolidation of Vodafone India. So what does that mean? It's only a merger of the wireless part of the business, or other parts of the business will be run directly by VODA under a separate brand name? Or is it that the tower companies will be kept outside this because a very large amount of valuation of both companies comes from the tower assets? So I think these are the things which are more complex than dealing with the regulatory at this stage. I'm sure they'll be compliant on regulatory, otherwise the process will not go through. But these other dimensions are a lot more complex and challenging given the current status in the economy and also the industry.
No, if I'm not wrong, I think they've clarified that tower business will be kept out of this, at least in this for now. But Rajan, Mathew, we'll let you have the last word on this show, simply because this is also has to do a lot with personalities. It's not just about Vittorio Kalau on one end, but Kumaramangalam Birla. He's had a very consumer interface business with Idea Cellular. This is the first big consumer brand of the group, and it looks like he is willing to throw in the towel when it's really required, to stick your guns out there, dig in your heels and put in the top dollar. He's not willing to do that. He's okay giving up his big consumer business. Is my assessment right or wrong?
So first of all, I think that's something that Mr. Birla will have to answer. I had the privilege of working with him when AT&T first came into the country. So definitely Idea has a very FMC orientation to it from the very beginning. So I think that will be there. It is now one of the most valuable parts of Mr. Birla's conglomerate. So again, I think the reality of what is in the future is really what is driving this. But let me just make a few points. One is that the 2014 guidelines on M&A were kind of dated, and I think we need to relook at this, especially let's look at spectrum. Today, we have MVNOs coming into play. We have spectrum trading, we have spectrum sharing, and we also have the widespread use of Wi-Fi, which is becoming ubiquitous. So again, we need to look at these caps vis-a-vis these new realities. Also, what does it mean in terms of these revenue caps when the future is all about data and we are only at 15% penetrated? So again, using some historical metrics to say what's the future going to look like and what should we be preparing for needs to come back into the whole decision of how we look at this particular merger and the M&A guidelines that perhaps need to be tweaked when we look at this.
You're building a strong case for the M&A guidelines being tweaked. Dr. Rahul Khullar also spoke about it, but not sure if Reliance Jio is going to be is going to be very excited at the prospect of the M&A guidelines being tweaked to favor a particular merger. But I must mention one point here, Supriya, that by the face of it, it looks like Vodafone will have control of the entity. But like Sanjay pointed out, you never know. The press release is a little vague. We'll have to wait and see which way the deal finally gets done, gets structured, who eventually controls the entity. I find it hard to believe that Vodafone will give up, as a number 2 operator, will give up control to the number 3 operator.
Yeah,
but again, we'll have to wait and see. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time out and joining us with that perspective in this special telecast right here on ET Now.
Thank you.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.